Imagine being born in 1960, the year Burkina Faso became independent, and growing old waiting for something as basic as water. Not water delivered in bottles, not an emergency shipment from abroad. Water that could be captured when the rains came, stored when the skies cleared, and used to keep farms working when the dry months returned. For generations, that was part of the story of Po. The area had farmers, fertile possibilities, young people willing to work, and land that could produce more. Yet one critical piece was missing. Po did not have the large water reservoir its people had sought for decades. Year after year, the rains arrived and disappeared, while a long-discussed dam remained a promise. Then something changed. In 2023, the long-standing request reached Captain Ibrahim Traore. What followed would eventually produce something the people of Po could see with their own eyes. Construction began in December 2025. On the 25th of July 2026, the Pocapro Dam was officially put into water. Think about the contrast. A dream stretching back to the years around independence, followed by a construction phase officially reported at just 8 months. The dam stretches nearly 2,300 feet and can hold roughly 274 million gallons of water. But those numbers are not the most important part of this story. The real question is what Burkina Faso intends to do with that water. Because Ibrahim Traore's larger ambition is not simply to build reservoirs, it is to use control of water to expand farming, support young workers, develop fish production, and strengthen the country's ability to feed itself. And Po may be only the beginning. Burkina Faso is building a national capacity to construct, restore, and maintain water infrastructure, rather than treating each dam as an isolated project. That is why this story matters. If you believe Africa should also be judged by what its people are building for themselves, follow this channel, because what happened at Po raises a much bigger question. Can one dam that took generations to arrive become the beginning of a new relationship between Burkina Faso and water? For the people of Po, the problem was never a lack of willingness to work. Agriculture had long been part of local life. The problem was that farming without reliable access to stored water placed enormous power in the hands of the seasons. When rain was plentiful, the land could produce. When the dry period arrived, opportunities narrowed. Local testimony collected around the Pocapro project describes just how difficult that reality could become. Some producers recall digging more than 16 feet into the ground during certain periods simply to reach a limited amount of water. At times, even that effort was no longer enough. And this was not a complaint that appeared yesterday. The desire for a major reservoir in Po reaches back to the years around Burkina Faso's independence. Different generations raised the issue. Promises came and went, yet the large water infrastructure people wanted did not materialize. That history explains why 2023 became so important. During a meeting with local representatives, Captain Ibrahim Traore received the request for water infrastructure that the community had carried for decades. His government then moved the issue into the machinery of the state. That distinction matters. A leader does not build a dam with his own hands. Engineers study the land, operators move the earth. Public institutions manage equipment, planning, construction, and maintenance. Political leadership matters when it turns a public demand into an instruction that those institutions are expected to execute. That is where the Po story began to change. The old project studies were revisited, plans were updated, the proposed structure was reconsidered with greater ambitions for the amount of water it could retain. For residents who had had promises before, another plan on paper would have meant little. They needed to see machines, they needed to see earth moving, and most importantly, they needed to see water remaining after the rain. But Ibrahim Traore's government was preparing something larger than the Po project itself. Burkina Faso was building a specialized national institution with equipment and a mission centered on dams and irrigated agriculture. And that institution would become the bridge between a president's decision and the heavy machinery that finally arrived on the ground. The machinery matters because Po was never going to become part of a larger water strategy if Burkina Faso lacked the ability to repeat the work elsewhere. Under Ibrahim Traore, the government strengthened a specialized national institution responsible for dams and hydro-agricultural development. Its purpose was practical. Burkina Faso needed people, equipment, and technical capacity that could construct new reservoirs, restore damaged ones, and prepare irrigated areas for production. This represents an important difference between building a project and building national capacity. One dam can be completed and celebrated. But when the same institution can move from one site to another, repair aging infrastructure, dredge reservoirs, and develop new projects, the country begins accumulating experience it can use repeatedly. That is why the institution behind Po deserves attention. In 2025, heavy equipment was handed over for immediate deployment. Within days, crews were already being sent into the field for urgent work. Elsewhere, teams intervened on threatened dams and carried out dredging operations. By 2026, Burkina Faso had set an even larger objective. National authorities called for the dredging of 100 dams during the year, while also pursuing the rehabilitation and development of areas where water could support continuous agricultural production. The significance goes beyond a single construction season. Ibrahim Traore's approach links political ambition to physical capacity. A government may declare that food sovereignty is important, but farmers cannot irrigate fields with declarations. They need reservoirs, canals, pumps, machinery, trained workers, and institutions capable of maintaining what has been built. This is where the Po story becomes larger than Po. The dam is the visible result. The institution and equipment behind it may prove to be the more important legacy. If that capacity continues to grow, Burkina Faso will not need to begin from zero every time another community asks for a reservoir. It will already have an organization expected to respond. And in December 2025, that national capacity arrived at Po in the most unmistakable form possible. The machines entered the site. After generations of waiting, the promise was no longer being discussed. The earth was finally moving. When construction began in December 2025, the people of Po had good reason to remain cautious. They had lived with the idea of a dam for decades. This time, however, bulldozers were not arriving for another survey or another promise. They were there to build. The construction phase was officially reported at about 8 months. That does not mean the entire project, including earlier studies and preparation, took only 8 months. But the contrast remains remarkable. A water project discussed since the decades following independence had finally moved from planning into physical construction. Then came the 25th of July 2026. The Po Kapro Dam was officially put into water, turning an old demand into something residents could finally see. The structure extends nearly 2,300 feet. More importantly, its reservoir can hold roughly 274 million gallons of water. Picture that number differently. For generations, farmers watched rainfall and then watched much of that opportunity disappear with the changing season. Now, a portion of that water could remain behind. This is where the meaning of the dam begins to change. A reservoir is not valuable simply because it looks impressive when full. Its real value is measured by what happens after the rainy season ends. Can that stored water reach farmland? Can it help farmers produce another crop? Can it support livestock? Can young people build livelihoods around agriculture instead of waiting for the next rains? Can fish production create another source of food and income? Those questions explain why Ibrahim Traore has presented water control as part of Burkina Faso's broader push for food self-reliance. The country is not merely trying to capture rain, it is trying to capture time. Every additional week that stored water keeps land productive represents time that farmers were once more likely to lose to the dry season. And that makes the roughly 274 million gallons at Po more than a statistic. They represent potential working days, growing seasons, harvests, and income. After decades of waiting, Burkina Faso had finally created the reservoir. Now came the harder test. Could the country turn stored water into lasting prosperity? The answer begins beyond the shoreline, because water sitting behind a dam does not feed a family by itself. It has to reach productive land. Around Po, the plan is to use stored water to support irrigated farming, vegetable production, livestock, and other agricultural activities. That changes the economic purpose of the reservoir. Instead of being simply a place where rainwater collects, it becomes infrastructure that can keep producing value after the clouds disappear. Consider what that means for a farmer. Without dependable irrigation, planting decisions are tied closely to rainfall. A poor season can reduce production, while the arrival of the dry months can sharply limit what happens on the land. Reliable stored water offers another possibility. Rice can be grown on irrigated plots. Vegetables can provide another source of food and cash. Wheat has also been discussed in the local development plans. Livestock can benefit from improved water availability. The local report on the project described an initial agricultural development plan of about 25 acres. It projected roughly 132 short tons of rice, about 33 short tons of wheat, and approximately 220 short tons of vegetable crops. Those are planned production figures, not harvests that have already been achieved. That distinction is important. The same report estimated that the developed area could eventually generate around 100 million CFA francs annually, roughly 180,000 United States dollars depending on the exchange rate. Whether those expectations become reality will depend on irrigation systems, farmer training, seeds, equipment, maintenance, access to markets, and careful management of the water itself. But the economic logic is clear. Burkina Faso is trying to turn rainfall that once escaped after the wet season into an asset capable of producing value repeatedly. That means the success of Po should not ultimately be measured by the amount of water visible behind the dam. It should be measured in fields cultivated, crops harvested, food reaching markets, and income reaching households. And agriculture is only one part of that opportunity. Because Ibrahim Traore's vision for these new water points also asks another question. If there is enough water to grow crops, could the same reservoir create an entirely different source of food, work, and income for local young people? For young people around Po, the most important question may not be how much water the reservoir holds. It may be how many ways that water can create a living. Ibrahim Traore has spoken about using new water points to help young people engage in agriculture throughout more of the year. At Po, he also raised another opportunity: fish farming, including the possibility of developing fish production in floating cages. That matters because one reservoir does not have to serve only one economic purpose. The same body of water that supports irrigated fields can help sustain livestock and create conditions for fish production. Nearby farmland can produce rice and vegetables. Producers can sell their harvest. Fish can add another source of food and income. One water asset can support multiple livelihoods. For a young person, that could make an important difference. When economic activity depends heavily on a short rainy season, months of the year can offer fewer opportunities. Better control of water can extend the productive calendar and give people more reasons to build livelihoods close to home. But this opportunity should not be confused with a finished result. Floating cage fish farming at Po has been discussed as a direction for development. It should not yet be presented as an established industry producing large quantities of fish. The real test comes next. Young producers will need training. Farmers will need reliable access to irrigation. Fish growers will need equipment and feed. Roads and markets will determine whether products can be sold profitably. And the reservoir itself will require responsible management so that today's opportunity is not exhausted tomorrow. That is why the vision surrounding Po is more ambitious than simply putting water behind a wall. The goal is to build an economy around water. If that succeeds, the benefits could move outward from the reservoir into farms, households, markets, and local businesses. And that brings us to the larger significance of Ibrahim Traore's strategy. Because Po is not being presented as the last dam Burkina Faso needs, the government is already looking beyond it. If the same model can be repeated across the country, then what began as one community's long-delayed request could become part of something much larger. Po becomes far more significant when we stop looking at it as an isolated project. When Ibrahim Traore inaugurated the reservoir, he made clear that other dams were expected to follow. The national agency responsible for dams and hydro-agricultural development was already working to identify additional locations where water could be captured and put to productive use. And Po is not the only evidence of that direction. Burkina Faso has been restoring existing reservoirs as well as planning new infrastructure. At Kokologo, another dam was returned to service in 2026 after rehabilitation. National authorities also set a target of dredging 100 dams during the year. The strategy reaches beyond reservoirs themselves. Burkina Faso's agricultural programs increasingly connect water management with irrigated land, crop production, livestock, fisheries, and employment. Under the National Agriculture, Water, and Fisheries Program for 2026 through 2028, the government is pursuing higher food production and approximately 125,000 jobs across the broader sectors covered by the program. Those jobs should not be attributed to Po. They belong to a much larger national effort. But that distinction actually strengthens the argument. Po is important because it fits inside a system that Burkina Faso is attempting to expand. This is where the phrase water revolution needs to be used carefully. One dam is not a revolution. A reservoir holding roughly 274 million gallons does not solve the water challenges of an entire country, but a repeatable system could change the equation. Build reservoirs, restore damaged ones, maintain them, develop irrigated land, train producers, grow food beyond the traditional rainy season, add fisheries and livestock, then repeat the process in another community. That is the real possibility behind Po. Its greatest significance may not be the water it holds today, but whether the institutional capacity behind it can produce similar results tomorrow. And this is also where Ibrahim Traore's political message meets a measurable test. For years, he has spoken about sovereignty and national self-reliance. At Po, those ideas are no longer only words spoken from a podium. They can be measured in feet of earth, gallons of stored water, productive farmland, and eventually in food reaching the tables of Burkina Faso. This is where Ibrahim Traore's role deserves closer attention, because his influence on the Po project is not best understood by saying that one man built a dam. His larger role has been to connect water infrastructure with a political philosophy of self-reliance. For Traore, food sovereignty means more than increasing the number of bags harvested after a good rainy season. It means strengthening Burkina Faso's ability to decide how food is produced, how water is managed, and how national resources are turned into opportunities for its own people. That philosophy can be seen at Po. The community raised a need that had survived for generations. The state responded by mobilizing studies, machinery, technical workers, and a specialized institution capable of carrying the project forward. That is an important form of sovereignty. A country becomes more capable when it does not have to reinvent its institutions every time a problem appears. Engineers gain experience. Equipment can move to another site. Lessons from one reservoir can improve the next. Maintenance knowledge remains inside the system. This may ultimately matter more than any ceremony surrounding the opening of a dam. Traore has also linked control of water directly to work. His message at Po was not simply that people should receive water. Young people should be able to use water for farming and fish production, turning infrastructure into productive activity. That is the difference between assistance and capacity. Assistance can relieve a shortage today. Capacity gives a country more tools to confront the shortage tomorrow. None of this means Burkina Faso has achieved complete food sovereignty. It has not. The country still faces serious security pressures, agricultural constraints, imported inputs, financing needs, and the difficult task of maintaining infrastructure over decades. But Po offers something concrete against which Traore's philosophy can be judged. Not a slogan, not a speech, a physical asset that must now produce results. If the reservoir remains functional, irrigated production expands, young people find work, and similar projects spread, Traore's argument for self-reliance becomes stronger. And that is precisely why the debate surrounding his leadership cannot end at Burkina Faso's borders. That wider debate becomes especially important when we examine how Traore's government is viewed outside Burkina Faso. Western institutions and human rights organizations have raised serious criticisms. They have pointed to insecurity, restrictions on political freedoms, pressure on journalists, and allegations of abuses involving security forces and armed groups. Those concerns should not simply be dismissed because a new dam has been completed. But neither should those concerns be used to claim that every development policy under Traore has failed. The economic evidence is more complicated. The International Monetary Fund reported that Burkina Faso's economy grew by 5.3% in 2025. It also reported that the government reduced its budget deficit from 5.8% of gross domestic product in 2024 to 1.8% in 2025. The World Bank likewise described the economy as showing resilience and noted that agricultural performance contributed to growth alongside mining and services. These institutions are hardly propaganda arms for Ibrahim Traore. Their assessments therefore matter when evaluating sweeping claims that nothing is working. At the same time, those numbers do not prove that every policy is successful. Gold prices and mining have played an important role in economic performance. Agriculture still faces problems involving fertilizer costs, imported inputs, financing, water management, and access to markets. And Burkina Faso's security crisis remains serious. That is why Po should not be used to erase legitimate criticism. It should be used to demand a better standard of judgment. The question should not be whether someone in Paris, Washington, Brussels, or Ouagadougou approves of Ibrahim Traore. The question should be what can actually be measured. Is the dam maintained? Does irrigation expand? Do farmers produce more? Do young people gain sustainable work? Are additional reservoirs restored? Does food become more available? The strongest response to foreign criticism is not another political speech. It is evidence that can still be measured 5 or 10 years from now. And that lesson reaches far beyond Burkina Faso. Because if Po succeeds, its most important message to Africa will not be about choosing between the West and Traore. It will be about choosing results over slogans. The lesson of Po is not that every African country should copy Ibrahim Traore or choose one geopolitical camp over another. The deeper lesson is that sovereignty must eventually become capacity. A nation can speak proudly about independence, Pan-Africanism, and control of its future. But those ideas become meaningful to ordinary families when they produce engineers, machinery, functioning institutions, reliable infrastructure, productive farms, and jobs. That is what makes the Po story worth watching. African governments should not measure success by how many dams they inaugurate. They should measure how much productive life those dams create. Water must reach fields, farmers need training and markets. Fish production needs equipment and feed. Reservoirs need maintenance long after television cameras leave. Self-reliance also does not require isolation. Burkina Faso can strengthen domestic capacity while still choosing international partners where cooperation serves national priorities. The important question is who determines those priorities and whether the benefits reach the population. And success cannot be declared in 2026. Come back to Po 5 years from now, then 10. Ask whether the reservoir still works. Ask whether irrigated acreage expanded, whether young people found lasting employment, whether food production increased, and whether Burkina Faso repeated the model elsewhere. That will be the real verdict. For the generation that remembers independence, however, something has already changed. A dream associated with more than 6 decades of waiting has become roughly 274 million gallons of stored water. Po does not prove that every problem facing Burkina Faso has been solved. It proves that one old promise became physical infrastructure. Now Ibrahim Traore and the institutions around him must prove that infrastructure can become lasting prosperity. For supporters of the Pan-African movement, for those following Africa new development stories, and for anyone watching Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, and the wider debate over Pan-Africanism, Po offers a simpler standard: judge sovereignty by what it builds and sustains. If you want to keep following Ibrahim Traore and Burkina Faso as that test unfolds, subscribe to the channel and share your view. Could Po become the beginning of a water transformation other African nations can learn from? Thank you for being here and watching our video. Every piece of content on this channel is carefully researched, written, edited, and reviewed by our team to ensure it reflects our own work and editorial approach. We do not rely on automated mass production. Each video presents our perspective on current events related to President Ibrahim Traore and developments across Africa.